Thank you to all of you who've attended one or both of our previous webinars on Jewish engagement and Jewish philanthropy. And welcome to those of you who are joining us just today for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Jewish community. As Vanessa mentioned, we are going to be talking about results from the 2018-19 Greater Denver Jewish Community Study. And that includes the 7-county region. So that includes Adams County, Arapahoe, Boulder, Broomfield, Denver, Douglas, and Jefferson counties. This study was funded by Rose Community Foundation, J. and Rose Phillips Family Foundation of Colorado, and Sturm Family Foundation. So I want to thank each of those funders for this work. And as there is no universal list of all Jewish people in the greater Denver area, we had to pull sample from a variety of sources. We used a consumer data list, which had hundreds of consumer variables from which we modeled likelihood to be Jewish. So anybody with a score of 0.4 or above, or at least a 40% chance of being Jewish, we included in our sample. And then obviously in the survey, we asked them screening questions to determine if they were Jewish or not. And then we solicited lists of members, supporters, et cetera, from local Jewish organizations. Some of you may be represented on the webinar today. And we're very grateful to the about 25 organizations that provided their lists to us. And then we take all of those lists and we dedupe them, and we pull a stratified sample for a primary sample that we can generalize to the Jewish population here. And that population number comes from looking at many sources, many surveys of the Jewish population nationally and here locally. And then we also pulled a supplemental sample, which allows us to dig deeper into various subgroups. So we would have larger sample sizes for those. The study was conducted online and by phone with live interviewers, and we called both landline and cell phone numbers. And it was conducted in 2 phases, in 2018 and the summer of 2019. And we're very grateful that over 2,500 Jewish households responded to the survey, so a great response rate. Now, as Vanessa mentioned, we have a very diverse community, and I'm going to go into talking about several different diverse groups. We're going to start with Jews of color. And again, this is Brandeis's methodology. And I'm sorry, let me go back up there for a second. Brandeis's methodology and their terminology. I also want to caveat this that I did not write the survey questions. I came into the project after the survey had been designed. And Brandeis estimates that there are about 5,400 Jewish by religion adults in the greater Denver area that are other non-Hispanic. And they, with the confidence interval, that's between 1,600 and almost 11,000. And Brandeis reported it out by Denver and what they call the outlying Denver area, again, those other 6 counties. So about 0.8% of the adult population. I'm going to turn on my pointer here so I can help show you some things. So about 0.8% of all adults are other, quote unquote, other non-Hispanic. And Brandeis also broke it out in their reporting by race, and you can see almost 9 in 10 Jewish people by religion identify as white. I also want to point out this other race that while in the survey, people could say other and then specify what that other meant to them. We do not have access to those data that they wrote in. So I do know from other surveys in the community that sometimes people write in Jewish as an other race and don't identify as white. So there may be some of those folks in here just to think about that. And now what I do have in the data file from Brandeis is whether respondents, spouses or partners and children were white or quote unquote another racial identity. I'm just going to move this a little bit so you can see more of the screen. There you go. So you can see here, and this is broken out by the respondent, spouse, and any children in the household. And as you can see, children, there's a higher percentage of children that are of another race. And I've shown the estimated number of households here. And so across all of these, about 18% of Jewish people in the greater Denver area live in a household where there's at least one adult or child who identifies as another racial identity. And that represents about 8,800 households in the area. Now here is that number I just said, 18% of all Jewish adults live in a household with a Jew of color. And you can see that the way to interpret this is 30% of those who learned about Judaism from an adult ed class live in a household where there is a adult or child of another racial identity. So these groups are all higher than average. So you can see where, again, this emphasis on adult classes, minister or priest perform the wedding. A quarter of those who attended a Chabad in the past year are Jews of color. And also there are higher percentages of Jews of color in those who've converted, volunteered for only Jewish organizations as opposed to non-Jewish organizations, or both non-Jewish and Jewish, donated small amounts to Jewish charities. And then down here a little bit more of the conservative, Orthodox, immersed engagement group attending services. So that was based on a religion, and now some of the attitudinal groups, so interfaith couples who feel only somewhat comfortable at events are more likely to be in a household with a person of another racial identity. Also, those very interested in learning about Judaism were higher, as well as it's being very important to be asked to donate by someone they know personally. They also were higher percentages in those who said that there were other obstacles to participating in Jewish life. And they represent a higher percentage among those who feel disconnected from the Jewish community because it's too far. And in terms of demographic groups, 34% of LGBTQ people, Jewish adults, identify as, live in a household where someone identifies as being of another racial identity. Also high in the North and East metro area. I'm not exactly sure what that's about, but also lower household wealth, including having skipped a rent or mortgage or utility payment, or having difficulty finding a job. Someone in the household has a serious mental health issue, also had a higher percentage of people of color. And these are measures around the children. So even though it's a small sample size, and I'll point that out when that's the case, but among households that have children who are adopted, 36% identify, have someone in the household who identifies as another racial identity. There's also higher percentages of people with another racial identity among the households where a child participated in a teen program or a youth group, went to Jewish summer overnight camp, participated in programs at the JCC, has a child at the day school, Jewish day school, and have children aged 6 to 12. And down here you can see some of the obstacles, the cost preventing them from sending their children to Jewish school, overnight camp, sending their kid to Israel. And about 4% of Jews of color have participated in a program specifically for Jews of color in the past year. Now that number is very low, but to my knowledge, there are no or very few programs specifically for Jews of color in the greater Denver area. And we asked about how inclusive the community is perceived to be by Jews of color. And about 4 in 10 say that it's very inclusive, with about 8 out of 10 saying it's at least somewhat inclusive. And 12% of Jews of color said that there was a specific instance when they or their family felt unwelcome as a Jew of color. Now, we asked about obstacles for participation in Jewish life, and We asked about specific obstacles, for instance, around financial costs of doing things. But we also asked an open-ended question, and this was the only open-ended question asked of everyone in the survey, and we received over 600 responses to it. So some of the responses for Jews of color revolved around not feeling welcomed or accepted, or that there was limited programming geared towards their families. You can see here, there's very little diversity in the Jewish community here, and not much space for Jews of color or LGBTQ Jews to find community. So speaking of LGBTQ Jewish people, that's the group that we're going to talk about next. And about half identify as female, half as male, and less than 1% of Jewish adults identify as transgender. And there are certain groups where the percentages were higher. So in the North and East Metro and North and West Metro areas, they were more likely to identify as female, whereas in the South Metro, Aurora, and those who are age 65 plus, those were more likely to identify as male. We also asked about sexual orientation, and about 6% of Jewish adults identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or queer. That represents about 4,000 Jewish adults in the greater Denver area. And here's that 6% of all Jewish adults identify as LGBTQ. And you can see these groups are have higher percentages of LGBTQ people. So those raised in another religion, those in the North and East Metro, those who feel disconnected because they feel unwelcome, lower wealth, those very interested in learning about Judaism, those who might have been interested in a program but felt it was geared towards a different age or family situation. Also, someone in the household has serious mental health issue. And again, learning about Judaism from adult education classes and people who have converted. And about 1 in 4 LGBTQ Jewish adults has participated in Jewish LGBTQ programming in the past year. Now, we also asked about which things they might be interested in connecting with other Jews who are LGBTQ, interfaith group. So you can see here that about 8 in 10 say that it's important or very important to them to connect with other LGBTQ Jews. And about 2/3 say that they would like to connect with other Jewish LGBTQ families with children. And about 2 in 10 say they're very interested in an LGBTQ interfaith group. About 6 in 10 are at least somewhat interested. Now, let's see. I'm not sorry, I don't know how to remove that top portion there, but maybe this will work. Nope, okay. Anyway, we asked about how inclusive Jewish organizations, synagogues, JCCs, et cetera, are perceived at being inclusive. And about 1/3 say that those organizations are very inclusive of LGBTQ people, and about 9 out of 10 say they are at least somewhat inclusive. Whoops. If you're raising your hand, if you could just ask your question in the Q&A, we can get to that at the end of the presentation. Thanks so much. So now again, in terms of asking interest in connecting with other LGBTQ Jews, about 8 in 10 have, and I'm sorry, we asked that already. What happened here? Okay, going to the importance of different considerations of participating in events in the Jewish community. You can see that almost all say that obviously homophobia, transphobia, other oppression are not tolerated. That's important for them to participate in events in the Jewish community. Also extremely important is that the language used is inclusive. And about 2/3 say that it's important that they know that other LGBTQ Jews will be there. And what are the obstacles to participating in Jewish life? You can read some of those here, but they revolved around not feeling welcomed or accepted, programs that are heterocentric, and some even mentioned homophobia, transphobia, or harassment. And we have a lot of diversity in other demographic groups as well. So with region, we have regional diversity. Each orange dot here represents 50 Jewish households. So you can see where they're clustered in the area, more clustered in Denver and Boulder, but then also sprinkled throughout. So Denver and Boulder have about more than half of the Jewish households in the area, but there's about 20% in the North and West metro area, 16% down here in the South metro. And don't forget about the North and East metro and Aurora as well, even though they have smaller percentages. Now with that geographic diversity comes some challenges. Again, from the comments for obstacles to participating in Jewish life, people mention about the distance and time it takes to get to Jewish events and synagogues, and also the aggravation they have to deal with regards to traffic, say on a Friday night, going to a Shabbat service, parking issues, having to go home after work to get young children and bring them to Shabbat services on a Friday evening. Others mentioned transportation issues, the lack of having a car or having to use public transportation or an Uber. And then some specific geographic locations mentioned lack of resources, lack of Jewish resources. In particular, the west side of Denver, also mentioned was Aurora and the northwest suburbs between Denver and Boulder, as well as Longmont. We have great diversity in terms of age. About half are under the age of 50, half are 50 plus. And some people, some young adults feel unwelcome because they are young adults. And some older folks mentioned they felt unwelcome because they were older. About 3 in 10 households have children, and some people in the obstacles to participating in Jewish life mentioned that they felt unwelcome because they had children, or they felt that there'd be hostile attitudes towards their children in synagogue, or they feel they have to fit a certain Jewish mom-parent mold. And then on the flip side is some of those who do not have children felt not welcome because they did not have children. We have great diversity in terms of how long people have lived here in the area. About a quarter have lived here less than 10 years, and about 3 in 10 have lived here 30 or more years. And something that came up in the comments about obstacles to participating in Jewish life were about whether they were natives or transplants to Colorado, and if they had raised their children here or not. You can see if you're not from Denver, it's very hard to break in. If you didn't raise your children there, it's very hard to break in. Now, again, I know I'm going very quickly and there's a ton of data in here. Again, you're going to have access to all the slides. So please bear with me. We're just going to try to touch on everything to give you an idea of what's in the data and what some of the insights are. So with respect to income and household wealth, you can see that there's great diversity here in income and great diversity among the household wealth. So keeping that in mind when you are designing programs and events and activities. And some people mentioned in the comments around events being predicated on social wealth or other related status. In addition, we have diversity with respect to physical and mental health. We asked about overall health, and about 6 in 10 said they have very good overall health, but 1 in 10 have fair, poor, very poor health. And then we had even more diversity among mental health. You can see here, this is in the past year. And again, this is before COVID. I'm sure these numbers would be significantly higher if we asked this in 2020. So in 2018-19, 6 in 10 said they had anxiety or stress in the past year, that they or someone in their household had that. 3 in 10 said there was depression. 2 in 10, a serious chronic physical illness. Of those who have children, 14% say that they have a children with a learning disability. So keeping these things in mind are important, again, when thinking about the population that you serve. And one of the comments was one of our children with special needs was not welcome at a particular organization. We also have quite a bit of religious diversity. You can see here that 2/3 of Jewish adults are Jewish by religion. About 1 in 4 are Jewish not by religion. And that means that they identify as Jewish, but when you ask what is their religion, they do not say Jewish. They say something else like atheist or agnostic. And then this 1 in 10 says Jewish and another religion. And you can see the number of households that these represent. And I want to mention that there were about 3,000 households that have someone who has converted or is in the process of converting. So in the comments, as a convert, I found the community regards me with suspicion rather than welcome. That's made my integration into the community difficult. We also have quite a bit of diversity among denominations. About half are affiliated with a denomination, with Reform being the largest, 3 in 10 here. And I just want to say in this other category, that includes things like Reconstructionists, Renewal, and others. But 46% do not affiliate themselves with a denomination. And some people feel that they are not necessarily welcomed because they're not raised Jewish, or sometimes they feel like they're not considered Jewish enough. With regard to synagogue membership, about 16% of Jewish households in the greater Denver area pay dues to a synagogue. And of the 84% who do not, you can see that they're actually seeking and participating in Jewish life. Everything from attending a JCC synagogue or Chabad, 6 in 10 of those who don't pay dues to a synagogue actually do those things. And 6 in 10 also are celebrating holidays with family or friends, attending half are attending a Seder, all the way down to taking Jewish classes and participating in Jewish social action groups. But there's a big however. That 7 in 10 of these feel only somewhat or very disconnected to any type of Jewish community. The biggest reason they feel disconnected is it's not relevant to their life right now, and we may or may not be able to do things to change that. But there are sizable portions of folks who feel that they do not belong or don't feel welcome, also that they're too far from the Jewish community, they don't want to exclude non-Jews, or they have a lack of Jewish knowledge. Those are reasons why they feel disconnected from the community. Now, another group that adds to our diversity in a big way, actually, are interfaith families. And that's because they represent 56% of Jewish households. So 56% are interfaith, and that represents about 29,000 households in the greater Denver area. Now, how do they feel? Only about 3 in 10 feel very comfortable at Jewish events or activities. And 7 in 10 feel somewhat or very comfortable. And you can see here 3 in 10 feel uncomfortable, or it depends or varies how comfortable they feel at events. And what makes them feel comfortable or uncomfortable? So what makes them feel comfortable is when the host acknowledges and welcomes people who are not Jewish, and when the Jewish rituals are explained, and when events are culturally but not religiously Jewish. And what makes them feel uncomfortable in particular is hearing interfaith marriage talked about as a problem. Also, what makes them feel uncomfortable is not understanding Hebrew or what's going on. And then also 2 in 10 say that feeling that their spouse or partner is being pressured to convert makes them feel uncomfortable. Now, these are some religious variables, religious related groups that are higher for being interfaith. So 56% of all households are interfaith, but 82% of those who say they are atheist or agnostic are interfaith households. Also higher interfaith among the personal engagement group and the minimally involved engagement group, also among those who don't attend Jewish religious services and attend some non-Jewish religious services, weren't raised Jewish. They feel disconnected because they don't belong or lack of knowledge or don't want to exclude non-Jews. And they are also more likely to be Jewish not by religion and Jews of multiple religions. And with respect to demographics, I thought this was a very interesting group here. The large donors to non-Jewish charities are much more likely to be interfaith households. They're also more likely to not be asked to donate to Jewish organizations. So there's an opportunity there, I believe. Higher percentage of interfaith households among those households that have someone of another racial identity, where someone in the household has a serious mental health issue, have larger incomes. 69% of LGBTQ households are interfaith, and also households with children are more likely to be interfaith than average, as well as in the North and West metro area. And in the comments related to interfaith issues, there are actually 3 slides of these comments. I'm not going to read through all of them, but I really encourage you to read through them because they talk about the way you can see the language that people use to talk about these issues, that you can really feel their emotions, and it can give you guidance into how to make them feel more welcome and included. And the comments around interfaith households revolved around feeling uncomfortable, unwelcome, rejected, judged, questioned, feeling different, feeling like an outsider. Some people mentioned rabbis refusing to marry interfaith couples or requiring conversion, and that could potentially turn interfaith couples away from Judaism. So again, lots of comments here for you to read through at your leisure. Now, another group we're going to talk about that provides diversity in our community are Russian Jews. About 1 in 10 Jewish adults in the greater Denver area were either born in or have a spouse, parent, or in-law who was born in Russia, the former Soviet Union, or Ukraine. And there were some groups that were more likely to have Russian Jews in them. Large donors to Jewish organizations, 16% of them were Russian Jews. Russian Jews were also higher percentages in the personal and holiday engagement groups, as well as in the South Metro area. And about half, or just over half, feel that there is a organized Russian Jewish community in the greater Denver area. And of those who said that there was that community, about 5% have participated in events organized by that Russian Jewish community. Again, I don't know how many events are of that kind there are, but 5% are participating in them. And from the comments, here's one individual who said, "You're an outsider because you're a Russian immigrant." And nearly 4 in 10 here of the Russian Jews say that some or all of their close friends are also Russian Jews. Now, again, asking about whether they, what considerations they take into account in participating, whether to participate in events in the Jewish community. About 8 in 10 here say that openness to different religious attitudes is important or very important to them. About 6 in 10 say that activities designed for secular Jews is important or very important to them. And about 1/3 say that, or nearly 4 in 10, say that specifically, specially designed Russian Jewish cultural events are important or very important to them in deciding whether to participate in an event or not. And then smaller percentages talk about business networking and activities in Russian, either for everyone or for children. And another group that we're going to talk about that provides diversity in our community is Israelis. And they are about 3% of the population here in the greater Denver area, or about 1,800 households were either born in or have a spouse, parent, or in-law that was born in Israel. And about 6 in 10, or almost 2/3, say that there is an organized Israeli community here. I just want to point out these are based on some smaller sample sizes, so interpret these results with some caution. But this is a very highly engaged group. About 8 in 10 say they've participated in an event organized by the Israeli community here in the past year. Again, based on a small sample size, so use caution interpreting that. And about half say that some or all of their friends are Israeli, some or all of their close friends are Israeli, and about half speak Hebrew in the home. And that's either speaking only Hebrew or speaking Hebrew and English. And they also say it's important or very important to them to have openness to attending, openness to different religious attitudes when deciding whether to attend a Jewish event. Almost half here say it's very important to have Israeli cultural events. And also Hebrew is quite important. To about half say that it's important or very important that they have activities in Hebrew. Smaller percentage say that it's very important to have activities designed for secular Jews, and even fewer say business networking among Israelis in the area is important. So the big takeaways here are that we have a really incredibly diverse Jewish community along many different dimensions. I mentioned many throughout the presentation. There are even others in the data file that we found, but we have, with our limited time, I could just cover a few. So as far as inclusion, we're doing well with inclusion for some, but there is a need to improve inclusiveness for many. So we have a lot of opportunities there. And the good news is that we fortunately have a lot of data to help us understand the size of these diverse groups, what's important to them, how we can message to them, how organizations can be more inclusive. So with that, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk more about the data, because I produced banner tables, as Vanessa mentioned. We listened to the interests and needs of our local Jewish organizations, and we wanted to provide additional insights based on those beyond the original presentation, which was a high-level overview by Brandeis. So with these tables, we can provide a deeper understanding of the data, and you can look at it for all of the respondents, and you can also look at it by various subgroups of interest. And again, all of the survey questions will be in here, so you will have access to everything. And the data will highlight the issues and opportunities facing the greater Denver Jewish community. And most importantly, we want to make these studies, the study's findings, actionable for you, so that anyone can go in there and look at data that's tailored to their specific needs and the populations they serve. It can help you with your strategic planning, sizing your population. You can also understand how to better serve your populations. Now, this slide has a lot of data on it. This is an example of one of the banner tables. There are hundreds of these tables, but I just want to give you an idea of how to read and interpret them so that you can do so with confidence on your own. So there are sets of tables for Jewish respondents or adults, and those are identified as 18+ who consider themselves to be Jewish in any way and have at least one Jewish parent or were raised Jewish or converted to Judaism. And then there's another set of tables for Jewish households. And these tables are in Excel format, and they have a table of contents, so you can just click on the question and it will take you directly to that table. Or you could just search in the tables for a particular word you're interested in. But all the questions will be in here. All the tables will start with the question text. In this case, it's how important is it that caring about Israel how important is caring about Israel to what being Jewish means to you? And then you will see the responses to the question over here. and then you will see all the results for all of the survey respondents, as well as broken out by different groups. In this case, it's broken out by gender, age, marital status, children, age of children, and school type, and the groups within those. Then each question will show who it was asked of, or what we call the base. So in this case, those who are Jewish or Jewish in another religion, or consider themselves Jewish or partially Jewish. Next, you'll find the unweighted base. Now, this is the number of people that answered the question. So in this case, 1,240 respondents answered this question. And the way to read the results is this 33%. Again, these percentages will add up to 100%, plus or minus 1, depending on rounding errors. But 33% of all respondents, which represents 23,702 Jewish adults, said caring about Israel is essential to what being Jewish means to them. Now, that 23,702 is very precise, and it's too precise. There's a margin of error around that, and we'll talk about that in just a minute to help you interpret that. But again, just to read these tables, so for instance, among those age 65 plus, 48% said that caring about Israel is essential to what being Jewish means to them. And these capital letters here denote statistical significance. So the letters refer to the columns in the table. So this 48% is statistically significantly higher than the results in columns D and E. So higher than this 23% and 34%. And the capital letters denote significance at the 95% confidence level. So that is a higher threshold. It means that there's only a 5% chance that this difference is due to chance. These lowercase letters denote significance at the 90% level. So there's only a 10% chance or less that this 37% of those Jewish adults who live in households where there's a child, that don't have a child under 18 in the household, say that caring about Israel is important to what being Jewish means to them. That is significantly higher than column J, this 27% of those who live in households with children. And I just want to note that while you can see all the population estimates here, these you can use all these percentages, but these population estimates may be a little bit off because they include the supplemental sample so that we can dig deeper into these subgroups. So if you're looking at the population size, it's from this primary sample for the total respondents. So I know that was a lot. We're going to have tables for, like as in this example, by gender, age group, marital status, presence of children in the household, age of children in the household, and the type of school that the children go to. And then there's another set of tables that includes by region, Jewish engagement, whether they're a synagogue member or not, whether this is a particularly interesting group that came out of the original presentation on household, if there's a household member that attends a Jewish event, but they're not synagogue members. So we profile those. And then also whether they donated to a Jewish organization or not, and the amount they donated to a Jewish organization. And those two were covered in the previous webinar on Jewish philanthropy. But you will have access to all of those data for you to dig into yourself. And just a quick note about margin of error. So obviously this is a survey, it's not a census of all Jewish people or Jewish households. As the sample size increases, the number of people who answered the questions increases, the margin of error decreases. And I've listed the margin of error at the 90% and 95% confidence level. So just the way to interpret this is if 50% of 100 respondents said some response said they were female, if we conducted this study 100 times, 90 out of 100 times, that result would be 50 plus or minus 8.3. So it would be between 41.7 and 58.3%. And at the 95% confidence level, there's a little more margin of error. So for instance, if we had 500 people answering the question and 50% said yes, then the result would be if we conducted the survey 100 times, 95 out of 100 times, the result would be 50 plus or minus 4.4 or 45.6 to 54.4%. I know that that's a lot. I hope I didn't give you too much information, but I just want to let you be able to read the tables and interpret them properly and use them for your organizations. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. And I will turn it back over to Vanessa for Q&A and other comments.
Thank you, Fran, for all of that. That's really helpful. We've got some questions in the chat, but I just want to encourage you all to visit our website, and the parts of this deck are pulled out, including how to read the banner table. So that slide that Fran had with all of the information and what each of the things means on each banner table is on our website. And for those of us who are not data scientists, spending 5 or 10 minutes with that can really help you understand how to use the data that Fran's made available to us. So I would really encourage you to look that up. And if you have questions, Fran has put her email here, but you can also reach out to me. I'll drop my email in the chat. We are both really happy to help get you the answers and the information that you're looking for. So with that, I'm going to jump to some of the questions that we have, Fran. And I'm going to start with this one. Someone asks that knowing the information presented here is based on data collected 2 years ago. Are there any talks about doing COVID or post-COVID surveys? And so I'll go ahead and answer that and say at this time there are not, but there are organizations who have done their own research over the last year, surveying the population that they serve. So I won't call out any of those surveys here, but I just welcome you to reach out and I'm happy to send them. I also know that Brandeis University did survey about 15,000 people in 10 different communities across North America to understand the effects of COVID-19 on Jewish life, especially as it relates to wellness. So that is posted on their website, and I can drop that in the chat for you all. But at this time, there is not any talk of doing specific Denver-based studies. So with that, Fran, I have a question here. Is there a difference between how welcoming different geographic areas are to newcomers? For instance, is Boulder more or less welcoming than Denver?
That would be in the tables. I don't have those results off the top of my head, but that is certainly available.
Great.
We can look at it specifically for everyone in those areas or specifically to people who, you know, have moved there recently.
Thank you. This is an interesting question, and I think it might be helpful if we look back at the obstacles to participation in Jewish life, where the comments were coded to more or less mentions. But this person asks, with respect to the comments, feeling it's hard to break in, feeling a level of suspicion, are comments weighted in the evaluation? And is their statistical evaluation understood with some level of qualitative factor that takes feelings into consideration and thus makes those feelings statistically relevant?
Well, I can say that I think I mentioned that over 600 respondents wrote in a response, and I did a qualitative analysis of those responses and coded them into various categories. Again, you can find that in a different presentation. It's too much to include in this one, but I do list out the ones that were more frequently mentioned versus the ones that were less frequently mentioned. So you can get a sense of that. So yes, it's qualitative analysis, not quantitative, but we can code those responses, and obviously there are different ways to code them, but you can tell which are more frequently mentioned and which are less frequently mentioned.
Fran, can you just flip over to that side real quick? If you have it in this deck.
That one's not in this deck.
Okay, so it is in the first deck around Jewish engagement, where those comments were coded, and so you can see where there were the most mentions.
Yes.
So as Fran has said, those are coded, and those were from 600 or so folks. So it gives us a good idea of where there are shared experiences and shared perspectives. Sorry, we've got a few questions in here. Let me just scroll up to the top here. Someone asks, only 1 in 10 Jews of color experience having felt unwelcome. How does this compare to the overall sample, to interfaith, or to other subpopulations?
Well, unfortunately, we did not ask that of interfaith. We asked that of just Jews of color and LGBTQ Jews. Sorry, I'm going through this so quickly. But yeah, so it was a much higher percentage of LGBTQ Jews who had a specific instance where they felt unwelcome, 1 in 4 versus the 1 in 10 Jews of color. Again, these are smaller sample sizes, so there is a margin of error around those numbers, but
yeah. We've got another question here, and I'm not sure that you'll be able to answer this off the top of your head, but how does the 18% of households with a person of color compare to other Jewish communities? Same question for how does the 6% of LGBTQ folks in our community compare to other Jewish communities?
Yeah, I cannot answer that off the top of my head, but there are many other studies out there. Vanessa, maybe you can talk about the Jews of Color initiative.
Yeah. So I'll respond to that and say that all of the Brandeis community studies are posted on their website. And so while it's not apples to apples, because we had originally, back when this was dreamt up, worked with a different research team, but in some ways the questions are similar, and we can understand who's in what community and what the size of those subpopulations are by looking on the Brandeis website and looking at their more recent studies that will include that information. I'd also say that the Jews of Color initiative is a great resource if you're looking to learn more about this population.
And my alma mater, just a little plug for them.
Great, thanks, Fran. Can the data tell us where interfaith families are most likely to live?
Let me go to that slide. Sorry, it's taking a little bit. So we're in interfaith families, and where they, so no, let me see. Oh, this is by religion, here by demographics. So the North and West metro area and the North and East metro area had higher percentages of interfaith households than average.
Great, thank you. Another question, what are the implications for Jewish organizations that want to create more open and welcoming settings to be more reflective of our Jewish community? What data would you recommend focusing on? Is it location, cultural shifts, programs, etc.? And so before Fran answers that, I just want to take the opportunity to remind you all that these reports, these decks, the new data, these are all tools to help inform your work, and not ever intended to be policy recommendations. But there are places that perhaps may make the most sense for your organization depending on your population or the issue area that your organization works on that may be most useful to look into. Fran, do you have any additional advice or reflections on that question?
I would just say D, all of the above. I would look at it all and look at the intersections and go from there with your planning of what actions to take. And I'm happy to help you look at that.
Thank you. And I would just sort of reiterate the fact that Fran, when she produced these banner tables, broke them out by subpopulation and by survey questions. So you can really go in and figure out what you're looking for and find that. And we can help guide you to the right place in the data set if you need that help. Fran, someone asks, can we compare the percentages about subgroups more likely to be another racial identity to similar slides for the overall sample? Is this group more or less likely than other Jews to have expressed the answers on those slides? And they say 11 and earlier. So I think they're talking about the first part of the presentation.
Yeah, let me go back there. Sorry, it takes a while to flip through these. Okay, so you're talking about these slides, for instance, some behaviors. So just to make sure we're interpreting this correctly, so 18% of all Jewish adults say that there's a Jew of color in the household. These groups are more likely to have Jews of color. There is, and that's how I looked at it, there are other ways to look at it. We can fully profile Jews of color. So instead of it's saying 30% of those who learned about Judaism from adult education classes are Jews of color, we could say what percent of Jews of color have learned about Judaism from an adult education class. So that's a different analysis, but that's totally doable with the data. So that's not exactly what was presented here, but we can certainly look at that.
Great, thank you. And we're coming up on time, so I'm gonna ask one more question here. But if you have any last burning questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try, or in the Q&A rather, and we'll try and get back to you outside of this webinar. So a final question here asks if you can explain the all Jewish adults comparison on subgroups more likely to be another racial identity. I think
that's what we were just doing here, and that's these 4 slides. So it's broken out by behaviors, attitudes, demographics, and religion. But again, the way to interpret this is out of all Jewish adults, 18% live in a household where someone, either an adult or a child, identifies as another racial identity. These groups are significantly higher on that. So 34% of LGBTQ Jewish adults live in a household where there's someone of another racial identity. And I actually know this, I do a lot of work in the LGBTQ community. So from that research, that's actually usually around the general population, not specifically Jewish, about 40% of LGBTQ Jewish people are of another racial identity. But that's an aside. So that's how to read these tables. So 28% of those who live in the North and East Metro region live in a household that someone identifies as another racial identity. And again, these groups are significantly higher than this 18% of average. So they're higher than average, more likely than average to have somebody of another racial identity.
Great. Thank you, Fran, for responding to these questions, for producing all of these additional insights. We're thrilled to have these at our disposal as we think about the future of the Jewish community. So with that, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. And if you have additional questions, I've dropped my email in the chat, so feel free to send them there. And with that, we'll close. Thank you for joining us over these last few weeks. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much.